So I'll get started. People will still keep coming in with the homework, I'm sure. How was the homework? Okay, straightforward? Everybody fine with it? Okay? Or did you wish you had had it before the midterm? Yes. Sorry about that. I need to rewrite the way that it goes. But I'll talk through a little bit about it today and why we're thinking about having it now. Today we're going to talk about government regulation. Mostly I'm going to go through the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act and sort of go through some big pictures of what our federal regulation are. I'll have an example with Boston Harbor and an example with Southern California air quality. We can sort of get out of the textbook and just talk more about the regulatory world that we live in. But so problem set 3 was for you guys to think about what these cost functions look like and what the cost functions behind are behind the graphs that we do. We can just keep drawing graphs. Here's a supply curve, here's a marginal cost curve, but let's think about what's behind the marginal cost curve or what's behind supply curves. So there was a thought question on the end about green consumerism. Did anybody want to say what they thought about that question? You could have a differentiable product that you could see the difference was as a green consumer, or you could have something like green electricity where you can't see the difference or touch the difference or smell the difference. It's no different. It's not perceptibly different. Anybody want to say what they thought about that one? Or have a comment? Or a product that relates to it? Something that we buy? Organic strawberries, not organic strawberries? Yeah. And we think about it as like it's an actually different thing. It's been produced a different way, come down a different supply chain, it's on a different shelf of the supermarket. It's easier to cognitively say, like, this is the green product. This is the product with less environmental impact. Versus electricity where there's no way to differentiate what we're getting. Anybody else have a product or observation? Right. Totally. And feeling good, for sure. I mean, so now, not just green electricity, but we also have people putting green on top of their house, putting PV on top of their house, which is like a $20,000 or $30,000 question. And it makes you feel good. You know you're producing your own electricity. You don't differentiate it anytime that you turn any device on. You don't know whether you're getting PG&E electricity or your own electricity. But there is like a, yeah, your satisfaction, your status or prestige. Now we have like the $100,000 Tesla where you can be like, you know, lots of people are buying $100,000 luxury vehicles that are Teslas, but now with this other one, we have like a signal about our flavor of $100,000 vehicle that we like. All right, so let's go into marginal cost functions that we just did. I just want to, so I'm switching between programs here. Go to thinking about what we just did on the homework and then what we're doing in chapter 10, 11, and 12. So what we just did on the homework is think about what is going on inside a marginal cost curve, right? We calculated a marginal cost curve. We saw a marginal cost curve is coming out of some sort of production process, right? And this idea of a marginal cost curve is going to feed into how we're thinking about pollution in chapters 10, 11, and 12, which are sort of tied together in what they're doing. So to start out with, so we had a marginal cost curve in the homework that was kind of going like this, but right now we're only going to worry about this sort of upward sloping part, right? We're going to relate that to supply curves and a marginal cost curve. We're just going to take a little branch of it that's of interest to us. And we have that part of the spreadsheet that we made and graphed. And now we can think about this also as our private marginal cost for the firm, or the firm marginal cost for that one company who's producing sets of goods. What we thought about in the problem set was they get a price from the market, and that tells them how much to produce. We could also think about at different levels of production, we can tell how much their variable costs are as the area under this. So we take the area under this curve and we recover variable costs. So it relates to the other things like profits and producer surplus and stuff. So we already tried to motivate in the past lecture, there could be the idea of a social marginal cost. If this output imposes some pollution on society and increases people's disease rates or some other costs, we'll also have a marginal cost curve that's going up. So I just want to think about this in terms of like, we could have a table where we have quantity. This is just like like the homework, and we have this private marginal cost that we calculated, right? And so this is like this is 0, 50, 75, 125, some schedule of marginal costs going up as our quantities go up. And then we could have a social marginal cost, just thinking of this as an additional column, right? So as our quantities go up that are creating pollution, we could have some costs that are going up with the pollution, with the output and with the pollution. So we'll just have another marginal cost, just like the one we did on the homework, but this one would have costs borne by society, not by the private company, not by the firm, not internal to the costs, that are going to give us a relationship to health outcomes, for example. And then there's going to be a cost curve that is the sum of these two, the social plus the private. We could add these up into a third column, right? And that's what we did a couple of lectures ago. So another thing that we could do is we can make another column where we have the marginal benefits at each level, or producer surplus, right? Producer profit. We could also call this profit. So we knew how to calculate profit, total revenue minus total cost. We could have that table, so we could have like, a profit going down. And then we would have, 100, 200, 300 at each level of output, we would have a profit. And then we could, so here we're going to think about this other curve that was motivated already, which was the marginal benefits curve of pollution. So right now in this first case, where we're still motivating it, we're saying we're either thinking about what's on this quantity curve as cube, amount of production, or amount of pollution. So in the gasoline example, where we did a bunch of these in chapter 10, it was billions of gallons of gasoline that we could say was either going to be a proxy for pollution or total output. But we could also just think about, we have some function that's going to relate output to pollution itself. Here I'm going to call pollution Z, just as a way to like have another variable that we're graphing of. So in our graphing, we have the producer surplus that this firm has, the profit that this firm has, and the amount of pollution as it's going up. What we think about is that the first few units of pollution or production will have a high marginal benefit of having that pollution, and that's going to decrease. So intuitively, we need to think about our factory is going to produce something that's going to create some profit. While it's doing that, it's going to create some pollution. We are going to create some surplus, some profit, some social value to society of having this output. So we want to figure out how much pollution we're willing to put up with to get the value that we're getting from doing the pollution. At low levels, there's going to be a high marginal benefit of having the pollution. At higher and higher levels of production, the marginal benefit of having pollution goes down lower and lower. So this is our profits, and then as our pollution levels go up, the amount of profit that we're able to get per level of pollution is going down. Okay, and then another way that we motivated it finally in chapter 10 is cleaning up pollution, right? So this is reducing pollution, abatement, reductions in pollution, and this is the dollar per unit that we're cleaning up. Say, in the gasoline case, it was Q equals Z, but say we can think about these axes as either being levels of output or levels of pollution. We'll look at some of the homeworks in chapter 10, 11, 12, and those, it'll be the same thing. That's the pollution and the output. But what we'll get here is as we clean up pollution, the first amounts of pollution that we clean up have a lower cost, and as we get to higher and higher levels, we have a higher cost to clean up our pollution. Higher amounts that we're cleaning up are going to be higher and higher cost. Right now, we're still thinking about this as internal to the cost structure of the firm. Another column on that spreadsheet you did on the homework. So the costs are increasing with the level of abatement. And then we could think about these prices over here in different directions, right? So this is when we're going to think about regulators. We're going to think about making pollution taxes. This will be a price of pollution that's going to correspond to some quantity of pollution that we're going to abate or reduce or clean up, right? So we're going to think about government regulations, putting tax on pollutions, on the amount of emissions. We're going to think about creating a market and letting people trade for the rights to pollute. We could think about subsidies. We could think about giving factories subsidies to create some sort of way to reduce emissions at the factory level. That would be related to these. The subsidy level would be related to how much we could pay firms to clean up. So for all the different amounts of pollution that we want to clean up, there's going to be corresponding to different prices in the market. So again, this could be another column in our spreadsheet where we're going to have levels of pollution reduction and different prices as we clean up. Okay, so and then we want to go back to our market versus firm supply curves, but now we're going to think about it in terms of pollution, abatement, pollution reduction, and we're going to think about summing. So we have this firm, we can think of making a spreadsheet with a column for firm level pollution reduction that has a marginal cost of abatement curve at the firm level. We could expand our spreadsheets out till we got at different levels of pollution reduction, or we could get different prices, right? And then we could sum the amount of pollution or pollution abatement that we're getting from each individual firm into a market level. All of the different companies that are producing coal-fired electricity, all of the different factories in Los Angeles that are emitting sulfur dioxide, all of the different trucks, diesel trucks on the road that are emitting nitrous oxide. So then we would have a market level marginal cost of abatement that's summed up from these firm level abatement curves. This would be, so this is like all diesel trucks, all coal electricity, right? And this would be, individual trucking company, trucks or something, truck models, different ways we can think about it. This would be a power plant in Ohio that uses coal to make electricity for the East Coast. So, and then, there's going to be price signals that relate to it. So here's an amount of reduction that we're going to get across all the different sectors, and that's going to set a price, and then that price would intersect with some sort of price that each firm could be cleaning up. So price per pollution could be set at a national level or an air quality district level, and that could transmit from all of the emitters to individual emitters of pollution. So we could think about that in the problem set where we had the market supply, market demand, and then we had firm demand. And so we had a market clearing solution that gave us a price at the market level, and then the firm took that and set it equal to marginal cost. So we have the same thing happening for pollution reduction. We got Lilia? She. So another way, and I'm going to motivate this later in the lecture, we're going to talk about pollution in two terms. We can think about point source pollution. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. Point source is like, this is like a tailpipe. It's localized. This is, a measurement, a place where you can put a measurement, a smokestack. And then ambient is, the overall environmental level. So we can have pollution that's measured at this coal-fired electricity plant, and then we can have the amount of sulfur dioxide in the air over the state of Vermont or over the eastern seaboard, right? And there's different ways that we're going to measure pollutants. This is like the small local. So here's this, just again, it's the same as last time with the firm versus market, but in our regulator vision that we're trying to put on, we're trying to think, okay, we are, we're trying to regulate air quality for the Northeast, and we're trying to eliminate acid rain. We have, this total amount of pollution out here, and we're trying to clean up some. So we set some target that we want to clean up. This is the amount of sulfur dioxide emissions that we want to reduce acid rain at an ambient level over the whole, the lakes of the Northeast or something. Go away. Okay. So we would have a quantity that we want to get to as a regulator to clean up to. And that, if we had some sort of overall industry abatement cost curve, that would give us a price. That would then translate to a price that individual firms would have to face in dollars. Sorry, I'm making a mess here. Talking right at the same time. So individual factories would have to face and figure out how much they could clean up. Yeah? I'm just saying that Z is pollution. This doesn't differentiate from Q. So it's a little bit funny because, in chapter 10, they just leave gasoline on the two axes, but sometimes we're trying to think about social costs are coming from the pollution from gasoline, not just gasoline itself. So I'm saying Z is like, let's just say a measure of pollution that we're trying to clean up. I'm just using some other variable. I don't know what the right, P's already taken for pollution, so. Yeah, economists love just throwing out variables. They run through all the English variables and they go through all the Greek variables, so I should really have some sort of Greek zeta or something like that. It's actually zeta. So we can also think that we have different marginal cost of abatement curves, and this is something that's going to come up. We'll have different power plants, and they'll have different marginal cost of abatement curves. And so they're going to get this price at different points. Some are going to clean up a lot, some are going to clean up a little, some are going to shut down. Some are going to go out of business and sell their permits to somebody else. They're going to get more money by shutting their plant and selling all their permits than they are by keeping open. Other ones, no problem. They can clean up their modern plant. They can switch to some other process easily, so they're going to clean up less. So we think on our point sources, we can have all different abatement curves. And this price is going to get us to efficient points and efficient allocations between the different firms by transmitting that price information. So finally, then we get to chapter 12, where we'll have marginal cost of abatement curves for two different sectors, but we could also think of this as multiple firms, or two different sets, this could also be firms in a simple case. So this is dollars per Z, dollars to clean up pollution, and in this direction, we're cleaning up in firm 1. This is dollars per Z on the same scale, but in this way, we're cleaning up for firm 2. So firm 1 has this marginal cost of abatement curve, and then sector 2, so in chapter 12, which we'll get to, but I'm just trying to tease it as we're thinking about marginal costs, we have electricity generation, and we have transportation. So we have diesel trucks versus power plants. So this is the marginal cost to abate going this way, and then we're going to flip it and put on the same graph a marginal cost of abatement curve for sector 2, which could be the diesel trucks or something like that. And these look like symmetrically sort of the same slope, but what they try and do in chapter 12 is something where one is steeply up and one is sort of like slower and lower, right? So different sectors will have different abilities to reduce pollutants at different sets of costs. So for all these different prices, we can reduce certain amounts of pollution. For all these different prices, we can reduce different amounts of pollution. And we can get to, if we get a market for tradable permits, we can say that for firm 1, it's costing them way up here to reduce at this level, but for firm 2, their costs are way down here. So if this is an initial allocation and we have a market-based system for permits, they could trade with each other and go over to here. We could go from an initial allocation based on their marginal cost, this is all going back to marginal cost, right? A set of internal prices determining what sort of place they should end up. So we'll go through this graph again, and I teased it last time, I'll do it this time, so this is a fundamental part of the class, it'll be on the final, so I'm just doing it like in a few different ways, but I want to think about today is, you guys on the homework, we're adding columns to the spreadsheet, and you can come up with a marginal cost curve that corresponds to different levels of pollution. Right now we have marginal cost curves with different levels of output, but we can move forward and think about marginal costs for different levels of cleaning up pollution. Okay, I'm going to switch out of this and go back to the presentation. Okay, I'm going to stop drawing and just talk. Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, two biggest pieces of legislation at the federal level. We have this all coming out of legislation in the 1970s, but being amended over time. 1970, the EPA started, Clean Water Act is started. And what's important here, in some sense, is what is the mandate of the federal government, right? Because we have a tricky thing in our country where there's always a push and pull between what the federal government should be regulating and what states should be regulating. For the most part, we think that states should be writing almost all the laws, and the federal government should be stuck just with things that concern the country as a whole. And there's always like pushing back and forth on that. But waters are difficult. There's the Great Lakes. There are like the Mississippi River. There's lots of really important water bodies to our economy that span multiple states. So clearly for navigation and commerce, there was some sort of background that the federal government would be involved. Now there's two big types of pollution that I talked about. There's point source pollution, so pipes going into rivers, factories with a pipe coming out. Often this is municipalities. A city's collecting all their sewer. That sewerage has a pipe that discharges to a body of water. So there's a place there that the government can regulate. The federal government can require that. The state government requires that the city of Podunk, Illinois has a permit before they emit things to the Mississippi River. We also have non-point source pollution. This is much more difficult. This is more diffuse, and we're still evolving our way to regulate things. There are many smaller emitters, and we have millions of cars on the road. We can't measure each one, so we have different ways to deal with that through technology standards. Another big thing I'm going to talk about the Clean Water Act is it came with a whole lot of money to build sewage treatment plants to clean up rivers and lakes. So it came up with a way to provide grants to build wastewater treatment. So some of the things to think about is what are we protecting? What are we measuring our standards on, and why are we measuring it? So a lot of times the standard is based on us using these bodies of water, and two of the main uses are actually for fishing and for swimming. So there's lots of bodies of water that we don't actually swim in that much, but that's the health standard that we want to put on that water. We want to say whether you could swim there, whether human contact is safe or not, whether it would be okay to let your kids splash into the Mississippi River, or are they going to get diarrhea or something if they just the Great Lakes in some of our big cities. Could you swim in Chicago or Detroit in the water that's in front of Chicago or Detroit? And then we have sort of a broad biodiversity mandate to manage and protect nature. So we have